Thank you very much, Michael. Um, Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all those who are here. Thank you very much for making the time to attend. I'm Dr. Parag Agarwal. I work in the drinking water sector, focusedly in the drinking water sector, and it's an absolute privilege to be here today and to be invited to moderate this session. Before I move any further, I'd like to very quickly introduce my co-panelists here on who are here today, and it's a very eclectic mix, I must say, and I'm sure there will be a lot of learnings to take away from this session. We have first Max Song. Max is the founder and CEO of Carbon Base, that is based out of Hong Kong. He has a very illustrious career in blockchain, venture investing, sustainability, and I think he understands carbon credits and registries like none other within this panel. So, welcome, Max. Really appreciate you being here and joining us from the airport. So, I'm sure we'll open the session with you and allow you to take off this discussion once we get to that point. Then we have with us Sam Farrans. Sam is the head of projects, King & Wood Mallesons in Hong Kong. Again, somebody who's worked extensively in the public and private partnership space, understands PPPs like perhaps none other, even outside of this panel, and very broad, diverse, experience base, foundation, and we welcome you, Sam. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to hearing and learning from you as we move forward. Last but not the least, of course, it shouldn't be saying last, but let's say second last here is, of course, we have Pierre Rousseau. Pierre is a senior strategic advisor for BNP Paribas Sustainable Business based out of Lisbon. Pierre again has extensive experience of investing in the sustainability space, financial services industry at large, but more specifically, he's pioneered some of the path-breaking work done in electronic trading in the early 90s, and to date, I think we learn a lot from him today. He has some interesting insights and comments on the COP26 that was recently concluded. So Pierre, welcome to this panel, and I'm very excited about hearing and again learning from you. Of course, finally, we get to Mike. I have to introduce you again, Mike, very briefly though, but Mike is the architect of all the dialogues that have been put together. He's here, a veteran of his sector, I think aviation at large, but he shares a huge passion connect and a cause connect with water, and he's been somebody who's added some tremendous dimensions to me personally in the recent past, and I look forward and welcome you to the panel as well, Mike. All right, so let's quickly jump into it. Just to set the background, I think any amount said is not enough. The future of the blue economy is the subject here. I think the future is very clear. It leads through the blue economy. I think there is no future without the blue economy. And that is something which, of course, everybody talks about, everybody discusses amply. Everybody says that the next world war will be fought on water. I mean, these have become cliche statements, but how many people do actually believe that it's here? I mean, the world wars are already, there is no world war that's going to really come up. It's already happening around us. There are battles, there are wars for water, with water as the key aspect, or the key bone of contention, if I can say, whether it is between between neighborhoods, between cities, between states, between provinces, between countries. So there is a lot that needs to be done. I personally believe, and I'd like to submit very respectfully that while there's a lot of work that is already happening in that direction, a lot needs to be done. There are a lot of learnings. I think sharing is something which is very important. Sharing of information, sharing of knowledge, sharing of experiences, and sharing of resources. All of these things needs to be put together, integrated. Nothing can exist by itself. Everything, water is an ecosystem. Water is not a product that can be made available without looking at other surrounding aspects. And I think all of that put together is what is very important. We've got tremendous experiences here, and I'd like to know, without much ado and without consuming too much time, let me jump into this and invite Max to come in and share your perspectives and your how you think we should really be going about it, and the world should really be going about it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Parag, and it's a pleasure to be here, and appreciate the opportunity from Pacific Basin Economic Council to share. If I can use my own screen sharing, is that possible, or do I have to go off the presenter slide too?
Let me do that for you, Max, now very quickly, sorry. Okay, you should be able to share your screen now.
So just give me 5 seconds.
Figured it out? There we go. Over to you, Max.
Max, you're on mute.
So thank you very much. What I want to do is split my presentation into two sort of sections. Hopefully this full screen view is okay. One part is just a brief reflection of the challenges that the maritime shipping sector faces in decarbonization, and then a more broader look at actually the way that we assign value to the natural ecosystem through the mechanism of carbon credit registries and the opportunity we see in the next few years to actually innovate and improve this registry process itself. So a little bit about the kind of problem space that we're facing. The next 10 years sees us having a challenge to reduce our total carbon emissions by 50% of our annual footprint. From the Paris Agreement, which was arrived in 2015, we've been able to demarcate this optimistic orange line that all the countries kind of work together to reduce CO2. And this green line here is actually where we need to be to stay underneath 1.5 degrees. So you see that there's actually about 32 billion tons of CO2 remaining in our decarbonization push in the next 10 years. The overview of the carbon markets as they exist today, the dark blue are places where there are regional compliance carbon markets. So Europe, California, and Northern New England. And then most recently, China also has turned dark blue. And then there's many parts of the world that have not yet fully established or in the process of establishing such a market. But shipping is actually very fascinating, and I want to highlight this because it actually correlates with the activities for us to do the reduction. In some ways, the shipping challenge actually is to reduce 50% or so of emissions over the next 30 years and actually use the data collection process to allow ship owners and charters to actually face this decarbonization push. This is actually creating a demand for blue ocean credits, because up to now, most of the credits have been terrestrial and they have not actually had to consider where the source of carbon credits reduction comes from. So there are a lot of market leaders in shipping, especially in container shipping, and also some in bulk shipping. And the scale of impact actually is quite challenging, because from a shipping perspective, a lot of the source of emissions comes from the consumption of fossil fuels and actually powering these ships. And so in order for ship companies to become carbon neutral, they do need to actively make use of the blue ocean credit economy. We sort of believe that there's a rich data ecosystem available to actually drive this. And we think that data is going to be one of the key points of actually decarbonizing the shipping industry, both in the attribution of carbon credits as well as the attribution of emission sources, and allowing sort of the value supply chain to actually interact with who's supposed to be actually footing the bill for decarbonization. And here's just a brief snapshot of the very nascent blue carbon ecosystem that I'm sure our panelists will talk about in more detail. From a physical perspective and geological perspective, a lot of our natural resources actually has, a lot of the carbon in the natural resources cycles through the ocean, actually in its way to being reused. As of today, most of the ocean's carbon credit creation process has not been fully recognized as a source of carbon credit creation. And this is actually one of the key things that I think sort of stands in the way of our progress forward. So just to switch gears a little bit and kind of share with you a brief vision of what we're thinking about. We think that the carbon markets themselves are actually up for reimagination, because as of today, very few people fully understand how they work, why they're important, or even how they participate as companies or individuals. And this is kind of an overview of the existing carbon markets today. On the far left are these 4 registries that serve as the arbitrators of value assignment. The dark blue here is the people who develop carbon credit projects using their time, effort, and money. These are the people who sell the wholesale developer projects over to finally the buyers, which are name brands we recognize today. But the thing to focus on is actually the carbon registries, because they actually have the ability to define new methodologies. So if they choose a methodology to be existent, for example, mangrove projects, or any other sort of blue ocean economy methodology, it then allows people to actually monetize the efforts they do there. If they do not choose that methodology to be valid, that effort is essentially philanthropy. It doesn't have any kind of corresponding economic angle. Coming from an Asia perspective, we see that there's a huge concentration of emissions in Asia, in Indonesia, in India, and also in China. And at the same time, we're seeing this interesting kind of shift towards the online world, with Facebook's metaverse expansion announcements to the recognition that carbon itself and the way that we treat our environment has to be recorded digitally in order to make sense. And so taking a look at this registry map, we see that most of the registries are in North America and in Europe. And so actually Asia is, despite having about 37% of global emissions just in 3 countries alone, does not actually have an existing local registry, corresponding with this activity. And we believe this is actually an enormous opportunity in both a commercial sense as well as a standard setting sense. And so our proposal actually is to launch a carbon registry focused in Asia, based in Singapore, that can actually service all of the corresponding needs of both the new methodology design, the regional design, and also the use of new technologies. So just speeding through this a little bit more, we think that there's kind of interesting positive value externalities associated with these carbon credit creations.
We lost you, Max. Max, are you there? So I think his connectivity is a little patchy, given that he's at the airport. So we'll just wait for another few seconds. Hopefully he'll be able to join us again.
As of US dollar.
Okay, there he is. Max, are you back? You're on mute,
Yes.
Max.
Yeah, I just got cut off. But let me just finish the presentation and give it back. As a saying that I'll get my slides uploaded too. The process of actually attributing value to these carbon registries actually uses the blockchain in a very sort of native fashion. A lot of people have been talking about what is the actual use of blockchain as a technology. I think that the carbon registry use case actually is one of the best use cases possible, because all of the things you want to do with the registry actually exist naturally with the blockchain. And just to fast forward, there's a lot of done to build a registry. At Carbon-Base, we've been focusing on these 4 pillars of demand, supply, technology, and international credibility. We've had a chance to work with the United Nations Industrial Development Organization to help define new standards under the EU, and also with the Shanghai Academy of Quality Management to actually partner with defining standards for the national carbon emission of China. We're working with large shipping companies and real estate companies as uptakers who basically consume carbon credits. We want to make sure that they're aware of this phenomenon. On the supply side, we're working with large producers of carbon credit processes, including one of the largest hydroelectric companies in the world. And finally, on the technology side, we've worked with the largest French energy, waste, and water management company, and also the Africa's largest national conservancy, sort of implementing blockchain at scale. So a brief look into the future. We think that the registries of the future, especially in regards to the blue ocean economy, can actually use these new existing technologies to really assign value. And by that assignment, we can actually create interactions between the digital world and the digital economy, and actually the physical world we live in. And this is going to help people rethink the economic relationship they have to their natural habitat. So our team right now is pretty cool. It has great technology people. We also had a chance to work with Microsoft and also MAS for this opportunity. But I guess just the final message to leave you guys with is that the next 10 years, we need to actually have critical assignment of value to the natural habitat. We think that digital transformations in the registry ecosystem is really critical for that transformation. And we think blue ocean economy credits are actually one of the key things we should be adding as additional methodologies to the cause. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Max. I mean, that was a real eye opener, I must say. And I think, compliments to you for really being able to kind of get a handle on this entire world of carbon credits, and then being able to marry that with technology as you have. Blockchain, I see NFTs there, I see tokens there. So, I'm sure it throws up a lot of questions in everyone's mind, as it does in mine. And I'm not going to kind of bring them all up right now. But, one immediate thought is, actually two thoughts, which I'd like to really bring here and seek your clarifications or inputs on that. Is is this a platform where people can come in and let's say a company can come in and build their own tokens and kind of benefit from the carbon credit offtake? Or is this a token that you're actually introducing that has all of these facets to it? I mean, just trying to, get some more clarity on that. So that is one. And the second is there a provision for that you have where you can handhold companies and get them to qualify? First help them understand whether they qualify for carbon credits, and then B is then handhold them through the entire process and then get them to kind of plug in. So just these two questions, which I'd invite you to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Prag. The first question is that the idea is really to build a protocol, right? And so to give you a metaphor, Bitcoin actually is also a protocol. Bitcoin, has incentivized maybe 100,000 plus people around the world wake up every morning who are excited to scour the world for cheap electricity so they can plant their mining machines and basically generate the right algorithmic solution that earns them Bitcoin. We want to sort of do a similar thing, but instead of using and, in my opinion, wasting electricity, we want to actually incentivize a lot of people to wake up every morning and say, what is the most efficient economic way I can do to reduce CO2 in my local vicinity, and then be paid through the the sort of online and digital verification process for the pleasure of actually generating those negative emission units. So that's really the sort of idea. So essentially, we want to give people coins, carbon credit coins, when they are able to perform the tasks and validate that task at hand. And then the second question is, I think that this actually what you described is a phenomenal kind of new field business opportunity. A lot of people have not yet fully understood how carbon credits work, and frankly, even why they should either buy or then either try to make them. And I think consulting services and technology aided solutions to help people measure and then record and then transfer the carbon savings of their particular industrial activity is going to be very, very exciting to develop. So we've been very lucky to actually work with some shipping companies and real estate companies in the Asia region to actually help them understand this cause, and also help to see if we can actually take some of their investments in infrastructure and turn them into eligible units for carbon credit generation. But the road is very long in terms of actually being able to help everyone.
Yep, wonderful. I mean, again, continues to create intrigue, and I'm sure everyone will write to you separately, as I will, to seek more inputs. And yes, Mike, you were saying something.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, based on the jurisdiction, Max, why Singapore stood out over other financial centers like Tokyo or Hong Kong or Seoul, for instance?
Yeah, so the Singapore, as of today, is a placeholder, right? It really says that we want to have a center that is able to host it. And for us, the key requirement of any center is that it has the ability to sort of have strong standing between the West and the East, because we need to sort of engage with the large corporate buyers of carbon credits internationally, and also be able to manage the source of supply, in this region. I think Singapore has this really interesting mix of it's sort of balancing point between having a lot of connection to India, a lot of connection to Southeast Asia, a lot of connection to China. Hong Kong, I think, also obviously is an incredible financial center, and has the promise of being a green finance center in this region as well. So it's also a strong candidate. Tokyo, I think, is a bit challenging because having visited and worked there, I think it doesn't have as much internationalization and is a bit too removed from Southeast Asia. And to me, a lot of the sort of mangrove projects and a lot of the rainforest protection is going to have to happen in ASEAN. So having a center be closer there could be optimal. It could also be multi-center.
Yeah, Max, just one more point is on the government support side. I mean, part of our Dialogues Week is really looking at if you were in front of the policymakers, what's the one thing on your wish list you would like the policymakers to listen to in terms of making your idea a reality?
That's a great question. So I think for me, it would be we need to be much more serious about putting a valid price on carbon and having that be reflected in the way that businesses conduct their operations. Because the more people that actually value the cost and then by the flip side of the coin, the sort of the economic value of carbon, the more likely it is for the companies to do the right thing, right? To actually sort of to understand how to price this into their business decisions. So I guess my request to all regulators and potential policymakers who would later watch this is please find ways to imbue and embed the price of carbon into cost of doing business in this region.
Wonderful. Mike, any other questions? All right, great. So yeah, I think moving on, I'd like to invite Sam. Sam, please, over to you. Take it away. Enlighten us with the PPP world and how that can really make a difference to the blue economy going forward.
Sure. Good morning, good afternoon. Mike, can you take control of the slides? I mean, PPPs, just by way of background, are becoming more and more prevalent in every sector. Wow. And a lot of it is because of COVID, where governments have run out of money. And any money they do have, they're looking to use for financing health and other sectors. So PPPs for the last 2 years, and I think for the foreseeable future, will be the main way infrastructure, whether it be in the blue economy or the green economy, is procured with a far greater reliance. So what is a PPP? Well, it's a long-term contract where the private sector provides a public asset or service instead of the public sector. And the private sector bears the risk and management of that, but its remuneration is linked to performance rather than simply providing that asset. And that's a very important part of a PPP, where it brings private sector innovation to provision of infrastructure that would otherwise be provided by the public sector. So for the elements of the definition, the first part is it's a long-term contract. Most PPPs at the least are 10 years, going up to 25 to 30 years. And the term of that will really depend on the scale of the investment to be made by the private sector, the lenders, and the country risk. The higher the amount of risk, the longer the duration of the contract. And it's for the provision, if you go back, please, Mike, it's for the provision of a public asset or service. So assets are providing a port, an airport, road, rail, social infrastructure like stadiums, schools, hospitals, prisons, energy, provision of generation, transmission, distribution, and services like a bus service, train, a ferry, and social infrastructure like education facilities, healthcare, and the like. The risk and management responsibility goes on the private sector rather than the public sector, and that's the P, the partnership that is undertaken by them. And as I said before, the remuneration is linked to performance. So if the private party does not perform, if the service isn't provided, if the asset isn't provided, they are not paid. So the private sector takes the risk in the long-term contract as compared to the public sector. And that then brings innovation. And why are they needed? Firstly, as I said before, because governments have run out of money, but the public still expect infrastructure to be provided. And whether or not the level really depends on the social system and economic system of the particular country. But there's very rarely an absence of infrastructure. That really only happens in developing countries through conflict. The typical requirement for a PPP is degradation in infrastructure, where or congestion. And degradation arises because of a lack of maintenance or renewal. In the United States is a very good example of that, because all assets have an end life, and congestion arises because of increased use. So congested infrastructure in Asia pre-COVID were airports. That's certainly not the case now. And post-COVID, ports are suffering significant congestion problems. But at the end of the day, PPPs are generally required when governments have run out of money. Next slide, please. So how can they help? It's the private sector delivering something. The infrastructure is typically very well suited for PPPs. But they can also be used when there's more sensitivity when it comes to regaling functions like security, defence, police, justice, governance and policy setting. PPPs are more suitable for areas where a policy direction has been set and can be maintained without raising national security or sovereignty issues. But the benefits are that it mobilises finance, it takes private sector finance, putting it into the provision of public services or assets, and private sector finance brings about a discipline that is not seen in public procurement. And with competitive financing conditions, particularly if it's a solid project backed by a well-known investor and the government has a low credit rating, that will provide a far more competitive financing solution. The private finance market will filter uneconomic projects, which may be difficult for governments to do by themselves due to experience or political pressure. The private sector involvement often helps mitigate against delays or cost overruns where the government has limited experience. The private sector, motivated by profit, is simply usually better than government in procuring these type of assets. They may have more experience in adjusting fees, decreasing costs, and structuring the service delivery so as to maximise the number of satisfaction of users, which will in turn lead to higher revenues for the project. Next slide, please. But there are limitations. PPPs take longer to put to market because they need to be planned and designed before putting to competitive tender, as compared to conventional government procurement, where it's really just a construction contract. The government does carry some risk, in particular when there's availability-based PPPs, because the government does pay the private sector for provision of that infrastructure or the service. But having said that, if the service isn't there or the infrastructure isn't there, the government doesn't pay, and the risk generally falls on the private sector. But they won't resolve a fundamental government credit issue. It's very hard for governments to use PPPs as a way to get through their low credit rating, because the private sector will be reluctant to finance PPPs in the event that the government has solvency issues. The next slide, please. So how can they help? Firstly, they identify an infrastructure that's needed by the public for the private sector, if the private sector has appetite and experience. It's important to align the interests of the public and private party together, because they won't always be aligned. And if they're not, that will create perversions that will mean that particular asset or service is not delivered. But it's important to balance the interests of the private sector and the public, because it's the public that is consuming this infrastructure. It's driving on the roads, it's using the port, it's going to the hospital that's been made available. So the legitimate interest of the public sector needs to be taken into account when structuring these. And because they're 25, 30-year contracts often, you need to put adequate controls in them in order to ensure that sometimes the private sector's motivation towards profit is tempered by the need for the public's greater use. So what's the relevance to the blue economy? In the next slide. That's a quote from the World Bank about the relevance of the blue economy, but PPPs will allow us to develop infrastructure for the better use of oceans by using private sector innovation. They are a method by which we can apply environmental and social standards to the private sector, which we would otherwise only be able to do through legislation, because you can do it through contract. And PPPs will allow the improvement of livelihoods and creation of employment through the delivery of infrastructure that would not be otherwise delivered because the public sector doesn't have the financing to do so. On the next slide. This is a quote from the EU Blue Economy report that at the end of the day, I won't take you through it all, but it talks about the shipping industry, which Max was referring to, and the concerns that they are facing, and also the energy supply chain as well. But there's recognition by the EU that public-private partnerships are essential for the delivery of these assets to overcome the issues that they're facing. So I want to just highlight a couple of PPPs that have been put to market already. Next slide, Mike. This was a PPP for a marine protected area in the Dominican Republic, 5,000 square miles of marine habitat, where the government didn't have the expertise or financing in order to manage that protected area. So there were two non-profit companies that were from two local conservation NGOs that were that were created. They were responsible for hiring and managing all the staff, and the government entered into a contract for them for 10 years that required them to buy equipment and pay personnel. They received financing through an international impact investor, but that payment that the government made over a 10-year period, whilst avoiding capital, but paying an availability payment, created enough of a revenue stream in order for the two local conservation NGOs to be able to financially viably protect a marine area that the government itself could not afford to protect. Another example on the next slide is a PPP at a port in Madagascar. Again, this is where the private sector and the public sector work together. Rio Tinto and QMM were developing a mine, but they required that the product of that mine to be taken out of Madagascar through a port, but the public sector couldn't afford to build the port itself. So Rio Tinto and QMM formed a joint venture, got a concession from the government in order to build and operate that port, received some funding from the World Bank, and received some tax concessions and the like from the government. But that meant that what was a financially unviable port became financially viable, and Rio Tinto and QMM also were able to take the product from the mine and put it to the market when they otherwise wouldn't have if they just had to rely on the Madagascan government. So it is, if well structured, it is a win-win situation. I just want to finish with a few other possible future projects in the blue economy that can utilise the PPP form of delivery of infrastructure. Emission-free transportation infrastructure, definitely. Hydrogen, which in my opinion is the future of energy provision, more so than gas, definitely will take over from coal. I think we'll see hydrogen generation at sea using offshore wind and floating solar as well, and that hydrogen then replacing gas in the future. Many people will be giving gas 20 years before their assets will become stranded assets. Sustainable fish farming is another area where the public and private sector can work. And obviously pollution control, where there's a number of methods by which the private sector can get involved in the generation of electricity and other pollutants through incentives in PPP structures in order to deliver a better blue economy. So thank you very much, Dr. Parrott. Any thoughts?
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. That was extremely insightful and very, very detailed, comprehensive. And, you know, from what you spoke, two things jumped out at me, and I want to again highlight them so as to invite you to you know, throw further light on it for the benefit of all of us and those who are here and the others who will listen in later. Is you spoke about PPP being extremely relevant where there is inadequate infrastructure. What about the role of PPPs where existing infrastructure is being grossly underutilized? Because I see that as a low-hanging fruit, because there is already billions of dollars of investments that have gone in with a purpose, and that purpose is being underserved. So that is one point. The second point which I want to bring up is access to financing. You know, whenever, I mean, you know, from our experience, whenever projects are intended to receive their revenue from a government body, typically they run into difficulties as far as being able to get access to funding is concerned, where that is concerned. A lot of investors are very, very, very apprehensive about funding projects whenever there's a government side involved when it comes to receiving the revenues. So I come from the drinking water space, and I'll, you know, very quickly for a minute speak about that. Is what we did was we kind of took PPP to another level where the government was reduced to only being an enabler, and we are working with infrastructure that is available, set up by the government or private sector companies, but the consumer is who pays for the service. So when we deliver safe drinking water, the consumer pays, and that is a very reassuring factor to investors and to the financing world, because then they see that, okay, you know, consumers are far more conscientious about making payments on time every time. And so I'm just, you know, I don't want to speak too much about myself here or what we do, but, you know, over and back to you to kind of throw some light on these two aspects.
Sure, thank you. Good questions, Doctor. For the first, there is a way in which PPPs can be structured to help underutilized infrastructure be utilized more, and that's through basically handing over operation and maintenance of underutilized infrastructure to the private sector, and either having them paid through tolling arrangements, where in the case that you just referred to, the public is paying them rather than having an availability-based payment from the government. And that creates a natural incentive on the private sector who wants to maximize profit to get that asset used by the private sector more. So that is definitely a very important way of increasing the use of underutilized infrastructure. Another way, which I think we're going to see more of in the next 5 years for the reason, as I said, the governments have run out of money, is asset recycling, where a road is sold to the private sector. A lot of infrastructure funds using money from pension funds around the world love existing brownfield infrastructure. They love buying it because it generally provides 8 to 10% regular constant returns. And asset recycling will be a very important part of every economy. Turning to your second question, there is no doubting that the private sector prefers to be paid by the public rather than the public sector, because governments are often a function of politics. Infrastructure can be very political, no matter what the country, whether it be first world countries like Australia or the United States and in Europe, or developing countries tend to cancel projects from time to time because of political reasons, where it's actually much better to have an infrastructure project where you are relying on millions of people individually using your assets. So the opportunity for that project to fail is far less because the risk is far more diluted. So really the only caveat to that is that I've never seen an accurate tolling forecaster for a toll road. They always get them dramatically wrong, and that's why so many toll roads go insolvent. But definitely, as a principle, it's always better to deal with the public as a user rather than the public sector.
Yeah. Dr. Parry, I have a couple of further questions before we carry on with the dialogue with bringing Pierre in a second, but I just wanted to touch upon what you mentioned, Sam, around hydrogen being the future energy for you, at generation at sea, and eventually replacing gas. Did you just heard you correctly? You mentioned about a 20-year lifespan still for gas projects, because I remember we spoke offline where there's still a lot of demand for LNG projects in Southeast Asia. And I guess coming back to Max's point at the beginning, where we're talking about a carbon trading, carbon credit registry, for a better, sort of an ecosystem to help the transition. I think it all nicely links up, because there's going to be still this legacy of both coal and liquid gas for the transition to these new energies like hydrogen. So it's just interesting to see that you put a 20-year time frame on it.
Well, it's interesting. Just before I came on, I had a meeting with an environmental consultant, probably the best environmental consultant organization in Asia. They do all of energy projects. They have no LNG projects on their books at the moment, so I don't think anyone will be building any more LNG projects. They have 70 hydrogen projects in Australia alone that they're doing environmental impact statements. Hydrogen projects are a way off. Hydrogen is a very dangerous commodity to ship, but we all said that about LNG 30 years ago. And now look at LNG. You have LNG trucks driving through India at the moment in very populous areas. So I think the rate of technological change is such that I think hydrogen will be, because there's so much at stake for so many countries, because you can have wind and solar, but if the wind doesn't produce, or it's not sunny, you are in real problems. So you've got to have a third, and gas is a carbon intensive energy. So I think it's going to take 20 years, possibly less, for hydrogen to be developed to the commercial scale that it can replace gas. Now, I'm talking about developed countries. Developing countries like Indonesia, I think, will have to continue to use coal and its abundance of gas for a while, because it simply has to. But for developed countries like Korea, Japan, Hong Kong, Australia, I would expect in 20 years' time, they will become stranded assets.
Right, thank you, Sam. Let's move to Pierre. Pierre, thank you for your patience. You've had a very, very constant and consistent look on your face, but it's time to kind of light up and step up and take it away from here. I think you're on mute. Pierre, you're on mute.
Hello. Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Barak. And I think I will start to talk a little bit in general about blue economy and why blue economy is important, and then probably give us some insight about why and what is moving. First of all, blue economy is important because first it's related to the ocean, and ocean is a very important part of our life. People forget about the fact that even if it's something that the people and the economy has never really looked at critical, but the ocean is 70% of the total surface of Earth, is 50% of our oxygen, and it represents a lot of importance for why we have life on Earth. So to preserve ocean is very important, but ocean is also a source of resources, and we haven't explored that. And even today, for some economy, ocean is very important. 80% of the trade is done on the ocean. So as soon as the Suez Canal is blocked, the whole world is blocked. So we realize that how important it is. 90% of the telecommunication internet is going through cable, which are in the ocean. The food is important. The providing of protein, the fish is very important. The development of aquaculture has been big. So ocean is something which has been important. And now when we have limitation on land, I think we need to start to look at what's going on the sea. Also, on the other side, on the sea, we do realize that 80% of the pollution we bring to the sea is coming from land. So agriculture is a very important contributor, even it's not as visible as plastic, but we are polluting massively the ocean, which is, as I mentioned to you previously, an important part of resources. And it could be also an important part of infrastructure. And I will come back on the different component of the economy that represent the ocean. What is important to understand? Is that the ocean is not an economy apart. It's part of our economy, and moving forward, it will be the biggest and the growing part of the economy. It's probably the fast growing one. Why? Because we need to go to the ocean in order to enlarge the power of our own economy. And this is something which is quite important. The first things that we need to realize in that is that today we have some of the economy which is coming from there. Fishing, shipping, some energy provider. We have the tourism also. And those ones we need definitely to make sure that we bring them back to the sustainable business. So creating a sustainable fishing company, creating a sustainable shipping business. And this is something that Max already mentioned. This is ongoing and the people are working on that. Developing a sustainable aquaculture will be extremely important to provide protein. Protein is an important factor. And on top of that, the development of the seaweed. The seaweed is also a new element that the people discover. It's very well known in Asia when it's well already used, but not all over the world. And the seaweed can be a very good ingredients that we can have in the future in order to provide a lot of resources that we do need. So when we look at the ocean, we see that there is a lot of opportunities. First of all, transport. Shipping for sure, but we can also explore many other ways of transport which could be developed, especially submarine transport. This has been something which has not been as developed except for the military purpose, but for the commercial purpose, there are probably maybe many things that could be done there. You can imagine that moving underwater is easier than moving above the water, so because you don't have the same. So a lot of things a lot of people are working on that space, by the way, more than we think. Propulsion has been discussed a few minutes ago. I think the propulsion by hydrogen and ammoniac and there is a lot of research going on that. So shipping will continue, but shipping, if we think about it, will be in full transformation. Why? Because out of the 60,000 boats, cargoes that we have, almost half of them are to transport fossil fuel and coal. So this one will disappear. So we will have a full transformation of the way, because we will not need in the future to transport energy on the way that we transport it today by the boats. It will be transported by cable. It will be transported by different mechanisms that the new technology will bring. Storage will be done by the hydrogen if it's generated out of the sea. So we do see that there will be probably a transformation, a huge transformation of our shipping business. Second thing, I want infrastructure. I think we have been developing a few minutes ago a mechanism of financing infrastructure, but infrastructure in the sea will be developed massively. Why? Because we will develop farms, seaweed farms, we will develop platforms, we will develop different operational floating mechanisms in order to extract value out of the sea. So this is also something very important that we will create. So if we develop platform and floating platforms, we will have to develop ports. So ports will change. They will not be only the way that we are connecting the sea and the passenger and the freight to the sea, but it will be also center of innovation, center of development, center of light, centralization for hydrogen capacity, etc., etc. So we do see that ports will be developed. So there will be a huge development of infrastructure that will link the land and the sea. Third things, the sea will be also the provision of a lot of resources. And we need to do it in line, with the conservation of the ocean. So this is what the blue economy is about. It's not just to use the resources and to destroy, but it's also to use resources that we can maintain and keep nature. Why? Because when we maintain nature and we keep nature, we can see that we are providing much more resources. I give you an example. During the COVID, the fishermen in the Atlantic didn't go out for 3 months. The biomass, the fish biomass increased by 30%. So it means that if we are fishing sustainably, it proves that we can generate enough food and enough protein for the people. Seaweed will be a very good thing and very important. But why all those resources are also very important? Because the sea is one of the main capture of carbon, much more than Earth, much more seaweed, fish are capturing carbon, plankton are capturing carbon, and they put it on the seabed, which means that it remains there forever. So the most powerful mangrove are also another example. So it means that the sea and the component of the ingredients of the sea are a very important way to capture carbon. And we will need, and this is coming back to what Max said, it's very important that we look at the carbon capture. After, the way we will use carbon for credit, for monetization, or for valuation, this is something that we can discuss. I don't believe that the credit carbon is the only way that we can use carbon. We can use carbon for guarantee, we can use carbon for dividend payment, we can use carbon in many different things. So we need to be innovative in finance. We can use carbon to token, whatever. But what is important is that carbon will be valued and carbon could be monetized. And this is very important because ocean will be the biggest part in order to capture the carbon, okay? Last but not least, conservation. If we do the conservation of 30%, if we do conserve 30% of the marine area, we will generate enough fish to feed 25 billion people. Why? Because when we do the conservation, we do regenerate nature. And in addition of capturing carbon and creating additional potential of capture carbon by creating seaweed farming, by creating mangrove coastal protection, etc. In addition of that, if we do create marine protected area, and we see previously with some that we can finance them properly, even in the most terrible country like and difficult country like Dominican Republic, etc. We can finance MPAs because MPAs can generate revenues, enough revenues in order to maintain the conservation that we do around by the tourism, by the seaweed plantation, by the sustainable fishing, etc. You have the organization like Blue Finance, which are developing a blended finance model or PPAs model in order to do co-investment of NPAs all over the world. And this can be replicated and moved. But if we do the conservation, at the same time, we will be able to develop activities which will not disturb this conservation. And it's quite proof. If you create a marine protected area, 3 years later, you can fish 3 times more fish around the marine protected area that you used to fish in the previous marine protected area. So there is something which is very important with the blue economy, is that we can develop economical viable model, which at the same time will preserve the nature and the biodiversity. One message today, we talk about the PPPs to finance that. I think we will have to create innovative finance in order to finance also the new economy that we have. We have some example by using the carbon as an asset. We have to use the biodiversity as an asset also. So valuing and monetizing the externalities are probably some way to go. But we can also develop other way to finance. Blended finance, impact investing will be definitely catalytic funding, because we have to realize that one thing is very important is that investors are not used to invest in the ocean economy or in the blue economy. It's mainly state who have invested, or the banks. The shipping is mainly financed by banks, for instance. The fishing is mainly financed by local territories, so it's not really a financing system. So there is a lot of subsidies coming from the government. So we need to bring the investors. So it's very important that investors bring and realize that ocean is very important in terms of growth. The second big things that we need is that the SDG 14, which is the SDG for the ocean, is the smallest invested SDG today, and the corporates do not realize how dependent they are from the ocean. So there is a disconnect between the economy, the corporates, and the entrepreneurship also related to the ocean. While 60% of the population is living along the coast, but has less than 100 kilometers. And also, as we know, many of the danger with the sea rising and things is also coming from that. So ocean is a very complex matters to follow, but it will be the very important one that we will have to finance. So at BNP Paribas, we do work on some model of financing. We are participating, for instance, we are one of the members to finance the coral, what we call the coral reef, the Global Fund for Coral Reef, for instance, which is about to finance small communities, because this is also what is important to take into account, is that there is an important social aspect in the ocean, because 2 billion people are living thanks to the ocean, and we need to keep that in mind, and we need to do the big finance, but we need also to do the small finance in order to make sure that those people can benefit from the value of the ocean and live properly. I will finish by telling you with the connection to Glasgow. So in Glasgow, there will a big news is that for the first time, ocean has been recognized as one of the elements for climate change. So especially through seaweed, there have been a 1 full day on ocean, which never happened before. So related to the ocean and the economy. Why? Because we do recognize also the importance of the ocean, not only important for the resilience of the environment, the climate, the biodiversity, but also the resilience for the social resilience and the economical resilience that it will bring. Just to mention today, if we believe that the ocean is an economy, it will be the 7th largest GDP, and is the fastest growing one from now to 2030. So in 2030, it can become the 5th largest economy in the world, which do realize that it's an economy also where you have something very specific. As you are in the middle of the sea, you do not belong to anybody, to any country. It's something which is shared by everybody, which can bring an additional complexity in terms of legal component that normally we don't have if we have to build infrastructure. But this being said, it's important to realize the importance that the ocean is now having and the potential of business that we can create out of the ocean. And I will finish by telling something is that, you know, the best way to do deforestation is to develop seaweed farming. Because as much as we are industrializing seaweed, we can develop a processing oil and oil for food and for the largest food provider, which will prevent to use soybean and palm oil. So indirectly, many solutions that we can have and will come from the ocean. And the way to finance that will come from different innovative way and probably by financing more the ecosystem, so the sea ecosystem that we will have to finance, as we need to finance large infrastructure, but we have also to finance small project and small village.
Thank you, Pierre. That was absolutely brilliant, I must say. And just to your point, seaweed and the virtues of seaweed, I think the biggest evidence that goes unnoticed is the fact that marine life, fish, never fall sick while they're in water.
Exactly.
They only fall sick once they're out of water.
The value of seaweed is enormous, because you in Asia, you know it very well, because Japan, China, and Indonesia are the biggest producer. Today, more than 80% of the seaweed is produced in Asia, but it has to grow all over the world. And this is something to create the good seaweed is also very good, because seaweed is about food, it's about textile, it's about replacing maybe plastic. It's about biomedical, it's about medical, it's about fuel, it's about biomass. So the seaweed can be, and also, like kelp, for instance, grow every day by 30 centimeters. So every centimeters of kelp is also capturing carbon. So this is also what is very important, is that it will be a very, very important instrument like mangrove in order to capture carbon. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, exactly. In the pandemic, you mentioned when the fishermen didn't go out for 3 months, how that impacted the marine life in a positive way. Similarly, when people didn't go to work for 3 months, oceans cleaned themselves up. Every river body, every water body started to just look bluer and started to look cleaner and became a lot cleaner. So yes, of course. So I'm going to, the other point you made, which was very interesting, and it was actually a realization. It was always there, but it was a realization, is that as renewable energy sources become more and more adopted, as they get adopted more and more, we'll have these tankers transporting fossil fuels going off the waters. And that's going to be a significant impact because, furnace oil and coal going off the waters means, it just means such a force multiplier of an effect on the entire ecosystem. But
there is a big issue. There is a big issue to address, is that or you will clean up 30,000 cargos that you need to probably recycle. So this is a huge business that probably can be created about recycling the future cargos instead to end up on the beach in Bangladesh or in India.
That's right.
So there is probably an opportunity of business here for people. Yeah.
But I have one question for you, and again, I come from the drinking water perspective, because that's the little pond of the water ecosystem that I understand best. Is with desalination becoming such an order of the day, especially I speak from the Indian perspective. There are more and more desal plants now being set up, and with the brine going back into the ocean. This is more out of curiosity. I'm just wondering if you could throw some light on what is the impact of desalination, where we are taking water from the ocean, throwing back the brine back into the ocean, removing water. So how does this really affect the entire ecosystem there?
Okay, I think there are two things. First of all, when we talk about desalination process, is very high in electricity. So the fact that we are moving more on renewable, it's a good thing, because at least we are generating energy which are coming from the renewables instead to have desalination coming from the fossil fuel. So that's a very important point. The second one is that we are getting more and more, we need always to get the science view about what's going on in terms of impact. And we have taken the lesson from the world now that we need to make sure that we are controlling all effects as much as we can to try to change nature. We have to make sure that we do it in a proper way and we do not disturb any of the existing balance which exists in nature. So to have the scientist view is always very important, and to back it up. This being said, with the way that we are improving in technology today, there is better way that we can minimize the side effect of the way that we are reprocessing, especially the desalination. And also we can also use the salt, because in the past the salt was not necessarily used. So now today we have a lot of opportunity to use the salt. You know, even people believe that maybe in 3 to 10 years it will be a best way to do batteries, and it will be salt will be the basic for batteries, so, and storage, because they have the capacity of storage. So I do believe that technology, and we need to still believe in the technology, which is one of the means that will help us to get the right way to solve a certain number of issues that we still have as a collateral damage today. In any transformation, you have collateral damage. We need to see, what are the priorities that we would like to define. This is the same kind of things where we talk about energy and we talk about nuclear, for instance. Is there a good debate, a non-debate? For me, it's a debate to have, at least, because we need to create a certain level of energy. We have to optimize the energy that we do. We have to minimize as much as we can, but we still have to have enough energy to make the world running tomorrow. And whatever you are in the planet, you need energy. So, and if we can decarbonize it, is the priority. So let's set up the priority first, and after that, let's believe in technology to help us to move forward.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, if there was a way to do this, I'd probably appoint you as the Marine Minister of the world. So
I don't think so.
Dr. Parry, can I come in for a second again? First of all, I just want to thank Pierre. I mean, it's like we're getting like a huge vision, as it were, the scale of opportunity, but also, sorry to put a dampener, I see the scale of the issues when we talk about national interests versus regional interests, especially in this part of the world where we haven't really touched upon geopolitics. I don't want to go into that, but with a lawyer on the panel, Sam, you're probably very used to the challenges, especially around your port businesses, vested interests, national security issues versus commercial issues. And when we're talking about the ocean, obviously what you can control is nearshore. But once you go into international waters, where's the international legal framework and which organizations have the jurisdiction? Because it seems to me right now, China's going about their business to create their jurisdiction, what they believe is the South China Sea belongs to them with islands. But Sam, I'd love to get a comment on that. And just the second part is for back to Max, because I know Max has got to leave in a second, is obviously what Pierre has talked about here. I mean, do you agree with what Pierre's saying in some of these areas? I mean, in terms of the seaweed, I mean, surely that could then be lots of the projects that your carbon credits and coin business allocate to developing in the region. So that's so maybe Sam first and then Max, and just a reminder to the public joining us.
Yeah, definitely, Michael. I need to go because the flight's boarding. So I just want to quickly say that I really agree with what Pierre has mentioned. And recently the UN started to create this thing called a SD, Sustainable Development Mechanism, which actually is the sort of foundation for international carbon credit. And so the rules of how these SDMs will be allowing to be created inside different countries, I think it's going to be kind of the way that international carbon markets get evolved. And I hope that Pierre's able to be at those discussions so that the people who are writing the rules of how these carbon credits are recognized can learn from his expertise and also his wisdom. And I apologize for having to leave a bit earlier, but it was a big pleasure to be here with you guys, and look forward to more discussions. Thank you, Michael.
Well, yeah, let me just quickly come back. Safe travels to Max, but to the attendees, if yourselves have any questions for any of the panelists here, including Max, we'll have them answered and responded to either online here or offline. So please enter them in the chat box, and then we'll definitely respond. Yes, Mike.
So I just wanted to come back to Sam's point, because obviously I think the legal threshold on a lot of these things comes up, and love to hear some of the good and the bad examples, Sam, from your own wisdom.
Well, I'm not a maritime lawyer, and I don't think I'll comment on any particular country. There is the law of the sea, which governs your own territorial waters and also the waters outside any country's territorial waters. And there have been instances where countries have gone to the United Nations Court of Arbitration and successfully obtained an award against another country for encroachment. It comes down to the political will of that particular country to enforce that award. And that's a political consideration and a commercial consideration as well, as it can promote trade wars and the like. So yes, these using PPPs and developing the blue economy through structures like that can work, because by and large, most of these are within a country's territorial waters.
Pierre, coming back to you, you talked about folding platforms in the sea that are going to, like, infrastructure within the sea. Can you go into a little bit more detail about, is there an example of that already where countries are, you know, besides
there are already some example of there is I'm aware about two projects, one in Norway, one in Polynesia, for instance, where the people are building large seaweed farm. And of course, when you build seaweed farm, what do you have now on sea? You have electricity, you have energy because of the wind farm, and you have also telecom. You remember the cable are underwater. You can have telecom, so you can build up very quickly platform. In Denmark recently, they have built a huge platform next to an island close by to the wind farm. In order to develop an industrial setup offshore instead to have it onshore. Singapore is very well developed in floating. They're organizing before the COVID. They were organizing a floating platform seminar webinar. So why is it important? Number one, because you're close to the resources that you will have, telecom, energy, and maybe producing. You can transform, and after that, it's a question to see how you connect to the shore and how you connect to the land. On this one, I know many companies starting to work on submarine systems. So at least if you fix the way that you connect, a platform to the shore, you can start to install train and submarine transport, which will be very stable and probably very efficient. So the fact that we will develop infrastructure offshore will become extremely important and growing. And then, as Sam said, you have what you have within your boundaries because you are your land, and then after that you have what is out of your land, which is will be in the offshore, in the open sea. What is also important, this is why some countries today pay attention to the coral, because the coral can define the economical zone that you are in charge of and is part of your land. So if some of the small island with coral disappear because of the plastic pollution, you may have a redefinition of your economical zone that is determined based on your boundaries and based on your land. So all this is becoming the way that you will structure the sea, the way that you will push providing new businesses, providing the fact that you create value and economical activities which are profitable, will probably incentivize to create much more interaction between port and those floating platforms. Yeah.
So, Dr. Parry, just to finish my round of questions for these experts, is if you were talking to investors, you talked about trying to get more private sector investment involved, whether it's through PPP structure or direct investment through private or public means. what area would you say? I mean, you've covered a lot, Pierre, to be honest, but if there was one area you were giving investment advice, wearing your banker hat for the next 2 to 3 years in this part of the world, what would you say in relation to the blue economy is one question. And Sam, the same question to you, given your sphere of expertise. You talked about hydrogen, obviously, and gave a bit of a window of where you see that going. But is there one thing you advise your own clients at King and Wood on those areas, or especially linking it back to the topic today of blue economy, just those two quick, and maybe even Dr. Parag, if you've got something you want to share with the audience. So that's my final question for this round. Thank you. Whoever wants to go first.
Well, Pierre? Pierre,
Yeah.
would you like to? You're on a roll, so I'd rather keep you going.
Okay, I will. I think if the question is mainly first of all related to the water and the drinking water, it's fun enough because yesterday I had a lot of discussion around that subject, because it's becoming, as you say, a growing subject and very important, especially in Asia, with the drawing of all the big river, which is coming very fast. People talk about the Antarctic and the Arctic, but what's happening in the Himalaya is as important also. And the fact that especially in India, you may have a big problem between drought and raining season on the other side, which is difficult to manage. So today, the problem of water is that economically speaking is always very difficult to monetize. First of all, to value and to monetize. So what we need to do more and more is to integrate water in the ecosystem that we're working. You remember when I talk about the sea, we need more and more to talk about an ecosystem. Why? Because when we talk about small villages and we talk about small area, when we need to bring drinking water, sanitization, it's very important that we take this as a part of the activities that we will finance. So if we finance separately, economically speaking, it's very difficult for us to value. And secondly, valuation is almost infinity, because it's something that normally every single human beings need to have in order to live. So it's not something that you can even put $1 on it. So because it's an obligation to receive water. But so it means that if we need to put it in place to make sure we have enough infrastructure, is to develop activities and to integrate to the blended finance the fact that we need to provide drinking water and sanitization. And this is very important. It's like today we do that for mini grid when we need to provide energy. So instead to finance an activity, we finance an ecosystem. We do see how much we need to pay in order to finance the sanitization, how much we need to finance the drinking water. In many cases, it's not very expensive. Because it's a question to put some mini infrastructure in place, and then we incorporate that in the overall financing of the activities that we would like to finance. And this is what we are doing more and more. The sanitization of a house on the island costs $500 US. So you can finance it easily through different mechanisms. We don't need necessarily to create something big and something huge. What is important is to provide the proper system. It's the same for the waste, it's the same for the energy, it's the same for those basic utilities need to be now integrated into the way that you build and you finance an ecosystem. Okay, more and more. And with the blended finance, we can do that. It's possible to do it because we are mixing philanthropy, public money, and private money in order to be able to organize this type of I call it micro infrastructure project.
Yep. So in fact, I'd like to use this opportunity to quickly, submit what we are doing here, and it's pretty much from the drinking water perspective. But what we've done was we identified 3 problems. One was underutilization of existing water treatment plants. The other was the problem of accessibility. Everybody had a problem walking a few kilometers to go fetch water from those plants. And then we address these two problems. Of course, viability being the third problem, that largely, the water sector is plagued with a financial viability problem. So to address these, what we did was we created a last mile delivery to the doorstep of households, a solution built on the back of clean fuel powered three-wheelers. So we're basically using electric vehicles and CNG powered vehicles, delivering water to homes at a fraction of the cost of bottled or packaged water. And this is how, and we're using technology as the underlying support system on which this entire operation hinges. And that's exactly where, so there is mobility involved, there's transportation, non-emitting fuel, using non-emitting fuels, there's an agnostic approach towards water treatment, there's equitable access enabled through technology, and now we're integrating blockchain, and in fact also to the, in the next couple of months, launching our own water impact token, where which will actually raise money that will make safe drinking water available to people around the world. So, so that's a form of decentralized finance that we're also doing. I think Sam touched upon the fact that financing was largely dependent on public stakeholders, government bodies, sovereign funds, so on and so forth. But I think it's also time to kind of have a trickle-down effect on how every dollar that somebody puts out, whether through CSR, whether through a philanthropic effort, can actually go in to make water available to somebody somewhere in the world, because water knows no boundaries. Every glass we drink less or we save shows up in somebody else's glass somewhere in the world. So yeah, with that, over to you, Sam, for your, what I would like to call maybe perhaps closing comments, because
Mike asked a question where I'd suggest to my clients that they look to invest their money in the next 10 or 15 years in the blue economy. And I think probably there's three areas that stick out the most. Offshore wind in Asia is huge. Every country has an offshore wind program. It's probably one of the biggest renewable programs in Asia at the moment, with the tariffs being very, very attractive. So there's that. There's hydrogen, which everyone is piling into. And I have great faith in the technology that will eventually be developed to make it as safe as LNG. And I think that really is the future. And lastly, we've seen as airports get uncongested, ports get very congested during COVID. And assuming our buying habits remain the same as they've been in the last 2 years, I think ports will continue to be an area where governments will look for more and more private sector participation to develop that infrastructure. That's it.
So not the airports then, Sam?
No, well, there's a lot of very cheap airports going at the moment, and that's all part of asset recycling, and they will come back, of course, but it's a risky venture at the moment, that's for sure.
So, Dr. Parry, I mean, we have just a couple of minutes left, but we can finish earlier. There's no pressure to go all the way through. And I think on that note, I mean, we've heard from yourself, Dr. Parry, Pierre, Sam. I just want to say thank you to all of you for your contribution, and for Max, who is just boarding a plane, funny enough, which, I have to say I'm very jealous that he's able to go flying from wherever he was. Maybe he's leaving Hong Kong. Maybe he probably won't be back to the new year if he's leaving Hong Kong with the 3 weeks quarantine that we have still here. But anyway, with that said, it's been a fantastic dialogue, and I hope those who joined and jumped in and jumped out of the dialogue, and those joining from the live stream got a lot out of it. I've written pages of notes, and this is all being recorded as well, and will be made available through the necessary channels after, for those who couldn't make it. And I think this is going to be one of the ones that I will certainly be promoting to listen back to, because Pierre, absolute, genius in terms of encapsulating such a huge topic with so many really useful insights of where the future is going in terms of biodiversity, some of the solutions that we're going to be seeing in the transition to net zero. I didn't realize there were so many uses for seaweed. It's something that I'm going to start looking into myself. Sounds like I should be investing.
I recommend you. There is 3 very interesting documents. The United Nations Global Compact issued recently a paper called Seaweed for Climate Change. So it demonstrates, and we have a group called Seaweed for Europe, which is explaining why Europe need to develop seaweed. And it's already happening, but it's not industrial. It remains very fragmented. And also there is an investing in seaweed for the people who want to learn about it. So you will find that on their website. Yeah.
I mean, with my Irish blood background, Pierre, we had so much seaweed, I remember, on our coastlines in Ireland that we didn't have much.
In Scotland, in Ireland, Scotland, there is a lot, but unfortunately, still very entrepreneurial, and there is opportunity to grow it fast.
Yeah, it might not be the good seaweed that you described.
The menu for the minister at the COP26 was made with seaweed, by the way, from Scotland. So they had a vegetarian seaweed meal. So that means it's becoming maybe
yeah,
they will enjoy.
It might not be the good seaweed, you know, that is coming from Ireland. I remember we used to boil it and it was not that great, I have to say. The dillisk as well, you dry it out and make dillisk. But anyway, with that said, once again, thank you all for joining. I implore you guys who are listening to look up for the other sessions coming up. Tomorrow we have a session in the morning all about the trade agreements, RCEP and CPTPP in the morning. And in the evening, a really fascinating look at the future of education in this part of the world, from how it's developed during COVID with stay-at-home orders and online education exposure, and the future using technology. So we're joined by business schools and secondary schools and institutions for that one. So don't miss out. So thank you once again. And a call it time is actually exactly 6:30. So have a good evening or good day wherever you are. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Such a pleasure. Bye-bye.